Hello, in this video we will be constructing together a mind map. So what is a mind map? A mind map is a kind of structure that looks something like this, in which I can say this is my root node. I will say main. So this is my main, and in my mind map I try to map out whatever I'm thinking or researching or whatever. So I can say use this as a to-do list. I need to go to the supermarket. Over here I can say that the supermarket should be red because it's important maybe. And here I'm researching something, so I can say research. And put over here everything that I did research, so maybe some web page, some bullet points if I want, or anything. And of course I'm using here the GraphEdit and GraphNode from Godot, and this is what we're going to do. The end result of this video will be. So let's do it. So the first things that I've set up is just creating a GraphEdit scene with the GraphEdit as a root node and a GraphNode scene. Just instantiated one GraphNode inside the GraphEdit, change the offset to make sure it's in the middle, and select the main scene to be executed, and I already have this working. And now I've set up my GraphNode with a bunch of little graphical changes mostly. I added this font from JetBrains Mono. It's a Bash 2 licensed font from JetBrains. I like it very much for developing things. I actually use it in my editor. I don't know if you noticed. And I also set up my style box for my frame using these parameters. If you want to copy it out or just check the code in GitHub. You can also change a lot of the little parameters and spacing around it, which I like it very much. But now you also notice that this text edit over here is not actually filling everything. I want it actually to fill everything, the size of my graph node. And this is actually a problem because the graph node in Godot right now it doesn't actually support the size flags of, say, vertical. Expand, it doesn't change anything. If I select the proper thing too, in size flags, it doesn't change anything. I actually need to change the minimum size that I have. I'll just make sure in code to match this up with the size of the graph node. So I've set up my size calculation over here. As you can see, I can get the getRect, which gives me the X and Y of my graph node and also the size of it. So I'm getting the Y size. I'm reducing just a little bit so that I don't actually match with the very bottom part, just to have a little bit of margin. And yeah, now I have something that is actually properly filling out my space. So I lost a little bit of the footage because of my microphone, but I think that's fine. So the next few things that I did was I saved my theme and my style box over here. This was cleared. There was nothing here at first. So I just dragged and put this here, made sure that this is actually a unique so that I don't override the previous one that I had, so that I can change how my selected graph node will look like. So I changed a little bit of background, maybe a little bit more whitish, and change the border to a more whitish color. So if I select here selected, I can see the difference. Something else that I did was I overrode these two signals, the close request and resize request. The close request, I just made sure that I queue free this node so that I can just remove it from my scene tree. And in the resize request, I do a little bit of math to make sure that my snapping is included in my rect size. So I change this rect size value to my new rect size. And if I'm using snap in my graph, which is the parent, I make sure that I follow the snap procedure. So if I execute it over here, you can see that when I change the size, it's following the snap too. If I switch it off, it's now smooth. Now for the next step, I started working on my GraphEdit. You'll notice that now I have two little GraphNodes here to make sure everything is right. I forgot to show how this works if I close it. In my GraphEdit, I will be overriding all these signals as well. Starting with the delete signal node. This one is probably the easiest one, right? Maybe the disconnections are easier, not sure, but the delete, what I want to do is to make sure that all my selected children are queued free, and I also need to make sure that my children, the children that I'm checking if it's selected, is also a GraphNode instance. So this is how I do it. If I show you guys, if I select something and click delete, it works well. If I select both by box selecting, it also works well. If I didn't do this check, notice that when I run in my remote side of the scene, I also have this C layer thing that GraphEdit uses for, I don't know for which reason, but this also means that if I don't check this, I'll try to check if this C layer is selected, which makes no sense, right? So it's important to also verify this. And finally, I also changed this duplicate node request. So the duplicate is Ctrl D. If I click Ctrl D now, I will create a duplicate of all my selected nodes, and I will add as a child. But notice there's a problem here. If I just do like this, if I select this and click Ctrl D, like nothing properly happens. You'll notice here in the left that more graph nodes are included. If I deselect and select it again, now you can see the other ones. The reason is that when I create this new duplicate, this duplicate is also selected. So that's not what I want. If I make it not selected, at least now when I duplicate, will be another one not selected. It's a little bit better, but now if I duplicate with my mouse over here, like it's duplicating over here, it's a little bit confusing in my opinion. So I just changed a little bit of the math for the offset to make sure that this new duplicate, I'm putting in the mouse position. So this is how I get the mouse position in 2D. And I make sure that this is in the center of my X value, just to make sure that this happens. If I Ctrl D over here, it's in the center, but on the X, but not on the Y. You could choose to do this in some other way, that's fine. This is just the way that I chose to do. Now for my connection and disconnection portion of the code, the connection is fairly simple. I just override the connection request here and call connect node with the same parameters. For the disconnect, I also override the disconnect request over here. I put it in the same parameters, but I also need to make sure that my GraphEdit in the inspector has this write disconnects checked on. Like I had this problem in the past, which I was not sure why it's not disconnecting, but now it works. So I can disconnect dragging from the right, and it's connecting properly. I also included some code for the connection to and from empty. I once again overrode the two signals over here. And I'm making sure that my new node, which is just a preload from my GraphNode instance, is offset by the release position that I get from the connection. And I do a little bit of math to make sure that more or less where I drop the pin is where I expect for the other pin to be connected to is. Also remember that the connection node needs a name instead of the object itself. So I was doing like this before, so it doesn't work like this. It should be the name of the new node. And also remember to add the child, because if not, other problems will happen. But now, as you can see, I can drag and get a node to the right and a node to the left, however I see fit. So with this, I don't actually need the add node button. So I could also have an add node button to create new nodes, but I think this is like faster to do things, in my opinion at least. The next thing that I need to do is to fix this. Once I queue free, you notice that there's still this connection. It only goes away when I move it around. So let's fix this. And so since there's no proper easy way to get what are the connections of a node, I created this little function to do that for me. If I get this get connection list, I'll get all the connections that I have in my graph. And it comes in like this type of structure here. For now, I don't mind what the port is. So I'll just create this little return variable to me, which will be a dictionary with left and right of the connections of this node name. And I'll run through it to make sure if I find on the from, I add to the right the to, and vice versa to the left. Just to make sure that to the right and to the left I have, oh, I noticed that this is wrong, but just to make sure that the right and left are properly aligned on the from and to. So with this, I can execute, for example, this connection request, just as an example. Do this, and I'll have this one has a connection to the right onto this graph node over here. And if I do the opposite, I'll have both now. And also I created this other little function for me to use the results of this check, of this for loop, and go through the left and right and do the disconnections from me. So if I said I want to disconnect everything from this node, I get all the connections of that node, and I do the disconnect of everything. So if I include this in my delete nodes request over here, when I click delete, it should work. Wonderful. So if I click here, it won't work yet because I didn't change that yet. So let's copy this and paste it over this code here on the queue request. Make sure to do this and also do this from the parent, sending my own name. There we go. So with this, my disconnection should work properly. Yeah, there we go. And finally, for my copy paste, it's pretty simple. I created an array called copy, for now at least. I add everything that is selected when I use the copy command, Control-C, and when I use paste, I just use everything that is in the copy array and duplicate it the same way I'm duplicating over here. So now if I copy this and paste it over here, it will paste here, paste again here. Can copy these two and it will paste both together once again, but it's pasting nonetheless. One other thing that I want is, you notice that if I select here on the title, I select the node, but if I click in the middle, I don't actually select it. So I want to also select the node if I click in the middle in the edit box. And to do that, this is how I did. So I came to the text edit and I used this focus centered. So this is my signal, where my signal is connected, and I made sure to call the set selected method of the parent, of the graph edit, and not my own set selected. Otherwise, if I just use my own like this, set selected true, if I did this instead of doing this, look what happens. If I have this selected and click here, I'll select both, and this is not what I want. I want to make sure that only the one that I'm clicking on is selected. So this is how I do it. And the last thing that I want to do before doing some more custom things is to be sure to save whatever I did here. So say I changed the position and did this. I want to save this somehow into a file so that if I load it again, like an application, right, I can just see whatever I did before. So it will be saved somehow. To save and load a file and use that as the basis of our saving and loading for the GraphEdit, the process is more involved. I'm using as a basis this website here. It's from the Godot game engine documentation. It shows how to save and load a game file using this file new, write, and then file new, checking if the file exists, and reading it. So I'm doing pretty much the same thing. So let's go back to the Godot file. So here in Godot, in my GraphEdit, what I did was I created a save and a load save. In my save, what I do is, let's go step by step. I first create a file. I make sure it's right into my res, just so it's going to be here. If you're doing a game with this, probably you want to save this in the user, as the Godot documentation says. But for my use case, I'm saving here in my res, which is the same file structure over here. I go through my children, making sure it's a graph node, and for that, I append some information of each graph node. Its name, its offset. Notice that I'm doing like this instead of just putting it like this. This is mostly because of how this JSON serializable thing, how it treats vector2 is a little bit weird. So I believe this is the best way to do it right now. So you just save X and Y separately like this, and also some data from the node. If I go to my node, I have this get data, it just gets the text from within my text edit to make sure that I'm saving that as well. And finally, I also get the connections. So I create this dictionary with the connections and the node data. I store it in the file in a JSON structure, and finally I close it. I can actually see it here. So this is the file I created, saving everything together. So back here on my load, it's a little bit more complicated, but similar, I would say. At first I create this file again. I check if the file exists, the same path that I have over here. I go through my children, the current children, and I just throw them away because I don't actually want to show what I have right now. I want to recreate everything from scratch. I open my file, get the line that I just put it here. I stored one line and I read one line over here. I go through all the nodes or all the information that is contained in this node data. So I get this node information here. I create an instance, add it as a child. This is important to do first things, because if not, the ready function is not loaded. So it means that I can't actually change the text of the line edit inside it. So just do this first. And then I set its name, its offset, getting from the offset X and Y and transforming it to float into vector2. And I set the data using this set data function over here, which just loads the text back to the text edit. Finally, I also go through the connections and run the connect node with all the information that I have. I finish closing my file and it's loaded. And something else that I also do is on every change that I do in my node, I also call the save. I could also have like a save button, or I could also use Ctrl+S to save or something like that. But I just chose to do it like this because I think it's faster to auto save every time. So if I disconnect, if I connect, if I create anything, if I disconnect, if I delete, if I do anything, I save. And I also added this one, which is if I move one of the nodes, I also save so that I get the new position. And notice that I also save from here if I do the close request, resize request, or even if I don't actually need this one to tell you the truth, but as you can see here, I'm already loaded. If I move this around, close it and reopen, it's loaded as it was beforehand. If I do, say, I create a new one over here and I close, run it again, and it's loaded. So like this, I can actually record everything that I have. I wonder if this is happening. I don't think this works yet. Yeah, this doesn't work. Okay, I still need to treat the size. So let's do this pretty fast. And now I've added the size X and Y to my save file, doing the same thing basically with the offset. And on the load side of it, I'm actually setting it before add child. This is important also because I want to set the size before I have the chance of changing this custom minimum size. So before I run ready, before I change the custom minimum size of the text edit, I want this getRect to be correct. Otherwise, I will have some weird things going on. Notice that I also fixed this to be 35, just as here, to make sure everything is matching. I was seeing some glitches because of that. So doing these two things, now if I resize it, close and open, I'll have it resized. Let's say I want two little things like this. Oops, I guess I clicked wrong. Okay. And I guess there's a bug. I'll need to find this bug. Be right back. Well, I'll search around a little bit for it, but I actually couldn't reproduce the bug anymore, so I'll just leave it as it is. And also notice that I had to override the text changed from the text edit over here too, to make sure I am also saving when the text changed. I forgot this earlier, but now, as you can see, if I do some kind of text here, close it and open it again, I'm properly saving it and loading it as well. So I'll do the same for the title. Somehow I want to change the title and the color of my boxes so that I can use this more properly. And yeah, we go from there. And now I've added a new scene called main, just so I can hold my GraphEdit and my Popup dialog as well in the same scene, right? So in this scene, I'll have my GraphEdit and also a Popup dialog that I set up like this. It has margin container, VBox, label, just to say it's set title. Maybe I could change this around, but that's fine for now. And a save button. I also created a script for the Popup dialog in which it's connected to the save pressed. And it also has an activate function, which is called from the GraphEdit. I'm using also this node path to connect between these two. So Popup dialog here connects to the GraphEdit, and the GraphEdit here now also connects to the Popup dialog. So if I come here to the GraphEdit, I'll have also a node path here with my Popup. And what I want is to have my node graph, my graph node. If I double click it, I want to show the Popup and save the title that is written within. So what I did is coming here in the graph node, in the node, I overrode this GUI input, which is this one now. I checked if there's a double click, and if there is, I call a method in my parent. And this is actually not needed. So I created this other function called change title in the GraphEdit, which just gets the node from the Popup and calls the activate from the specific node that I want to change the title. So finally, going back to the Popup dialog, when I call activate, I just save it temporarily so that I know what to do when I click save. I set the text of the label here of this text edit as the current title of my node. And finally, I pop up it as a centered pop-up. Finally, when I click save, I just set the title of the node as that specific text. I also save my graph, which is important, otherwise I won't actually save the title. And I hide my pop-up. To handle the saving of my title, in the graph node, I added in the get and set data also the title. So I'll have a title here and the get title to get the data, and when I set the data, I'll also set the title. If you don't remember, I'm using the set and get in my save and load save over here. So this get data here and set data here. So finally, if I run my new main scene, you see that's already saving. I can double click, change it, save it again, and change anything that I want. Close, open again, I'll have the new title. And now I have finished adding the color frame and color selected options. So let me show you the end result first. If I go to my nodes and I double click, I'll maximize it so that you guys can see in a better way. This is less than ideal, but let's say in this one, I can double click, I can change the title, I can see that it changes instantly. If I click save, I guarantee that my graph node is saved. And I can also change the selected frame and pure frame color. So right now it's selected, so if I change here, I can already see that it's changing. And if I change, say, the normal frame, if it's not selected, it goes to this color here that I'm setting. So how did I actually do that? So it's a little bit more complicated, more advanced. So first in the graph node, I set up always the get data and set data to save and load my proper information. And I also created these two methods over here. So first, this one is how I set the border color of my color frame and color selected. So I expect this to be of a color type. So I could even do this like this. So these two should be color. Given that, I get the custom frame and custom style frame and custom style selected frame. As you can see here, when I go to the inspector, there's frame and selected frame. So these are the texts that I need to put over here, frame and selected frame. I duplicate it so that I don't actually change every single node. I could, depending on your use case, maybe you want to change all the nodes at the same time, all the colors. So you just need to remove this duplicate over here. I set the border color and then I set back whatever I duplicated here back to my variable. Same for this. Now for the set border color without this RGB here, these two should be the type of dictionary, something like this. So this is dictionary. This one I use mostly here in the set data so that whatever I save, remember that the vector2 had some problems. Yeah, the same thing happens with a color when I transform into JSON. So I'm saving the RGB separately like this. And then when I run the load save file, I run this set border color here without RGB, which is this one here. And instead of doing this plain set border color, I also create a color with the 3 variables. That's the only thing that changes in this sense. So with this, the graph node handles this well. In my pop-up dialog, I change a little bit the structure of things. I put the tile to the right, the save button above. And over here, I also overrode or am getting the signals from my color selected, color frame, and text edit. When the text edit changes, I change the title. When either one of these two changes, I just set the border color using the RGB method you just saw. And finally, when I hit save, I make sure that everything is saved and also hide my pop-up. So this was the main thing that I needed to change. I don't think I actually changed anything over here in the GraphEdit. Yeah, no, I don't think I did. But yeah, with this, as you can see, you just saw, right? I can now change also the different colors of each of my nodes. So if I create a new one, I'll create the default one, and I can come here and change whatever I want for this new node. With this, I conclude this video of MindMap, because as you can see, I already have everything working properly so that I can actually create a fairly good mind map. Say I want to have another one here and another one here. Oops. I can put whatever I want here. Everything is being saved, and I can even change the size of some and add some different custom information within each one. Thank you for sticking with me for this video, and see you next time.